Contract administration. That is another step in the implementation phase that as a project manager you're going to have a lot of responsibilities. The first one deals with managing the donor contract, and then we'll look at managing procurement contracts. Managing the contract is very important. It's very important that you have access to all the contract documents, that you have a good understanding of all the agreements and all the amendments. And not only you, but also make sure that your team, as much as possible, are also aware of some of these agreements, amendments, and some specifications of the contract. You need to know the major categories of disallowed cost. These are the areas that mostly the donor will not pay for. And in many types of donor contracts, you will see that. There may be certain elements or areas that the donor will not cover. For example, the purchase of computers, that the donor will not allow them to be invoiced, meaning that your computers, when you're purchasing computers, they should not be charged to the donor accounts, and maybe they're charged to the organization accounts. But it's important that you know, so you don't run into problems later. Or any cost that must have a prior approval. That is also important. In the purchase of a vehicle, sometimes they have specific characteristics in terms of the origin of the vehicle, so it is important that they go through the process of approval before you complete the purchase process. You also need to know the reporting dates and any communication requirements, so that you are able to follow and able to produce the reports and the communications as they are required. Then you also need to make sure that all the obligations are made in accordance with contractual agreements. You need to manage your contract variations also in accordance with the provisions, and include in that element or in the organizational policies and procedures. And that in many cases, if there are going to be any variations or changes, usually involve the legal team of your organization or the people who have more experience on that, and they can help you manage those elements. But you need to make sure that you understand what are those obligations and what are those provisions, and you follow them through. You also need to understand the process for resolving disputes and changes in accordance with contractual requirements. Most of the contracts with donors will have a whole procedure, and they will help you identify how you need to manage any disputes in terms of even disagreements about how you perceive or you understand something that is said in the contract and what they actually mean. You also need to understand the process for obtaining approvals in terms of any changes that are made on the contract in accordance with those stipulations. And that process of donor contract, usually it's heavier at the beginning when you're trying to get an understanding of what they are. But once you have a better understanding of some of those obligations, the requirements, and your team also is aware of that, then it will be much easier during the later stages of the project life cycle. But it's during the early steps that you need to have a good understanding of what are those limitations so that you don't run into problems later. The second element that you're going to be heavily involved is the procurement administration. That is the procurement of all the goods and services needed by the project. Depending on the type of your project, your location, and the type of deliverables you need to do, you're going to be involved with that process. And it's important that you are involved. In many cases, we leave that responsibility to the procurement administration or the procurement unit, or even a procurement officer who's working with the team. But you need to be involved because there are many elements that will define the quality of the goods and services you're going to be getting for your project. We're going to look at all these elements that are part of procurement administration during this phase. The types of procurement, the terms of reference, the identification of vendors, the request for quotes and request for proposal, the selection criteria, and finally the contract award. Let's look at the first one. There are types of procurement. Depending on the organization, the donor contracts, there are many options for you for procuring goods and services. There are competitive, meaning that people are going to be bidding for the work, providing you with the best quality and the best price. It could be public bidding, meaning that it's invited to anybody, any company, organization, or direct invitation that you already have a list and you select one of the few or three companies that are experts in that specific area, and you ask them to send you their proposals. Non-competitive means that either there is a single source that you already do work and you're asking them to send you a bid, or sole source, meaning that there is nobody else but one organization, one company, or one consultant available who can do that work in that area of your project. You can also look at international, opening the bid for companies that are outside the country where the project is located, or just focus only on the national companies. Those are the options available that are part of the types of procurement. And then one of the most critical elements of this whole process are the terms of reference. So what are the terms of reference? It is the detailed description of the work. It means that it has to be complete, clear, and concise. It is the description of what you want them to bid, what you want them to do. The better the description, the more accurate the companies, the vendors are going to be able to provide you an estimate. It is also used as the basis for selection, administration, and evaluation of the work. So it's important that you spend the time that is needed to build good terms of reference. And they contain information that makes sure that it's complete, clear, and concise. Let's look at the content of the terms of reference. Typically, your regular terms of reference will have this information. It will have a context and a background of the assignment. It will have a detailed description of the assignment, meaning the objectives and the results, why we need that work, why we need that service, and what is the expected results out of that service. It will include the type of methodology you are requirement for the terms of the companies or the vendors of that good or service, a work plan with a timetable. You also require them to provide you information on the expertise that is required for that. That include the level of experience, of knowledge, reporting requirements, and contract policies, which even includes a copy of the standard contract and terms. The next step is the identification of vendors. Sometimes the organizations already have a list of pre-approved vendors, and you need to follow the organization and donor policies about who are those approved vendors. If not, you can go to an advertisement using the local newspaper or the website to find out and seek potential bidders for your work, or do a research using online tools or references to find out who are the companies or the vendors who have that skill or the goods that you're needing. Once you have that list and you more or less have a good number of them, you can send them an invitation to see if they have an interest, or you can then guide them to the process and give them information for a request for a proposal. You can ask a request for quotes when you're buying mostly goods. You're asking specifically for a price quote based on requirements. And when you are requiring or you're purchasing services, you use a request for proposal, which is a request for a price with detailed proposal on how the work will be accomplished. So you will have this documentation that will have a request for a proposal. It will include your terms of reference, and you're asking them to bid on that good or service. That process then, once the vendors and the companies that are interested in participating, they will read that, and usually they will find a timeline. The idea is that you need to give them enough time for them to prepare the proposals. Depending on the complexity of the request, they might need a good time. And during that time, you also need to provide them with opportunity to ask questions. If the quality of your term reference wasn't that good, that there were some areas that you expected they're going to be coming with a lot of questions. If not, some of those questions are going to be more about process, the procedure, how it's going to be the selection, or they might need some clarification about some words or the terminology you use to describe some of that work. In any case, you need to communicate all changes or clarifications, have a mechanism by which all the vendors, all the people who are bidding, they get the information on time, and everybody has a level player field so that everybody's treated the same. There are no exceptions. You're not treating a vendor different than the other one. And that is important because even from the organization perspective and even from the donor perspective, it is very important that you have a clear and open process for your procurement. Then you need to have a good selection criteria. Sometimes you will have it already defined for the standard contracts in the organization. You will need to have an evaluation committee. It could be members of your team. It could be people who have the technical expertise who can then review the proposals. You need to have a criteria to evaluate the vendor proposals. You can also include a bidder conference or presentations. Here is when something that you need them to demonstrate or show or discuss. And it's a good opportunity for the evaluation committee to also to ask questions, especially in terms of certain characteristics about the quality of the services or the goods they're going to be providing. And that also provides you more information to do a better evaluation of all those proposals. You will have an evaluation form that the evaluation committee will use to rank all the proposals. You will go to the selection of the vendor based on the ranking that you get, and then a process to communicate the results to all the vendors. The selection criteria form usually is a very basic table. You will list all your criteria depending on the type of work you need. Then you specify the weight, and you give a weight to which one of these criteria is more important. Here, the cost is the most important. Then you will list information on each one of the proposals. And that is information that the evaluation committee, each individual will fill. They will read the proposal, whether it's a technical approach, management approach, or past performance or experience and the cost, and they will place a rating. Based on their revision of that information, they will place that rating number, 1 meaning low, 3 meaning high, and then that rating is multiplied by the weight and you get the score. You add up the score and the vendor or the proposal with the highest number will be the winner. And that is a very open process that doesn't include any subjectivity. The idea is that all the project steering committee who was involved in the selection have an opportunity to rate the vendors. You add up all those values and you have a process by which you are able to select the best proposal possible. So when that is complete, then you engage with negotiations with the selected vendor. Depending on the type of contract, you might have different people involved in that. There could be some amendments. They need to be reviewed and approved by the legal advisor. That is important. Any changes to your standard contract that are maybe coming from the vendor or they agree among both parties, they need to be reviewed and then also approved by the legal advisor in your organization. The idea is that you're covering, making sure that all those changes are part of the contract because those are binding documents. And then the acceptance of the contract and terms. Both parties sign the documents and the vendor now is ready to start the work per their schedule and their planned activities that they have sent on the proposal. This whole process might seem a little bit cumbersome, but it is very critical that as a project manager you get involved in it. The quality of this process will depend a lot about how much emphasis you put, making sure that you got the right vendors and they're able to provide you the best quality in terms of their services or their goods for your project. Because this is a binding contract, there's going to be a lot of money involved in it. There are donor funds that will eventually be audited, and they will look at that process, making sure that you follow those policies and procedures set up by your organization or that were required by the donor. At the end, what we're doing with all this process is making sure that you get the right services, the best products available for the price that you have, and it's a competitive process. Again, there are going to be variations in the examples I'll show you, but the idea behind that is that it is a responsibility of the project manager. You cannot just delegate that completely to the procurement unit or the procurement process because they don't have that level of understanding about the project. And you and some of your key team members need to be involved. Maybe they are part of that vendor selection committee, and they are able to identify and select a vendor that will meet the requirements, that will provide you with the best goods and services that you need in your project.